Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Columbia Business School's Executive Education webinar series. My name is Gershon Ganogara. I'm here with Executive Education. Today we're going to be talking about developing and leading high-performance teams, development roles, and decision-making with Professor William Klepper. If you could go to the next slide, actually. We'll have a recording available after this webinar. I also wanted to point you to the Q&A section. The last 15 minutes or 10 minutes or so of the webinar, we're going to dedicate to a Q&A section. So if you could enter in your questions, we'll get as many of those answered as we can in the time. And if you want to just talk about us and refer to us on Twitter, please come to our Twitter page and use the hashtag there to comment and continue this discussion there. So I'd like to introduce Professor Bill Klepper. He's a professor of management at Columbia Business School. He's the academic director of executive education, and he's the faculty director of our developing and leading high performance teams here in executive education. And today he's going to share some of his thinking about that topic. So without getting in the way any further, I'll hand this over to Professor Bill Klepper. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gershon, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. And so what I thought we would do is, because I've got about 20 minutes of content, and of course I could go for 20 days if asked to. So I'm going to give you what I think might not only be something that will pique your interest with regard to skills and tools needed to maximize the potential of diverse teams in order to increase their productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness. But also, you can use some of these things today or tomorrow. So what I'm hopeful is I'm giving you some insight that probably is already there, but maybe let me reaffirm it and see if we can't help you with it. So let me start this way. By the way, as you've led your teams, have you considered the fact that there are two dimensions of that team that might be extremely impactful in terms of your effectiveness, in terms of your productivity? And the two areas that I like to focus in on with teams, particularly at the formation stage, is to understand the work of Belbin and the research on team roles, and I'll go into those here in a little bit, and particularly the interpersonal dynamics. And I use, by the way, the social styles model. Some of you may be aware of that out there, where we talk about drivers, expressive, amiables, analytics. They're all on your team. The question how you can best have their complementary, as you might say, capabilities work with one another rather than against, because some of these styles are toxic with one another. The other thing I bring in is an old model by Tuckman, which is, do you know where you're at with the development of your team? You probably remember the old idea, and you can see it there. You know, we go through a forming stage, a storming stage, what we call norming, and then performing. But I'm going to try and bring these together for you by, first of all, looking at what these roles are and how you might use them. What Belbin has told us, and you might be aware of this, is you need a chairperson. Sound familiar? That's, in most cases, might be you, but I might want to give you some different thoughts on that. But generally, he refers to that as your conductor. You always need a consensus seeker at the beginning of any team's formation. This is a person that's trying to build cooperation, right? Trying to build, I guess you might say, facilitation of the process. And every team is as good as the people that are on it. So you should ask yourself very early on, do you have the right people at the table? Those are your resource seekers. Now, those are all people-oriented roles, right? All you're trying to do is build what I call the human potential. Now you got thought-oriented roles. Who's your idea generator? Who are the people that basically like the idea of generating, I guess you might say, future possibilities, opportunities? Do you have them on your team? And oh, by the way, before they get out there too far, do you have somebody that can keep them in check? Yeah, because they might have a lot of great ideas, but you know, you want to analyze them. So you got to have some people that can kind of work with those individuals in terms of checking out what is the probability of success of any of the options, the ideas they're offering. That's going to help you in your decision making. And last, by no means least, you know, you're going to have to say, look, we're trying to go from the current state to a desired future state, right? What's that? That's change. So you need somebody in your action-oriented roles that is really a change advocate, that embraces that change leadership role. You need a strong implementer, right? When it's all over, the talking's done, let's get the rubber on the road. How are we going to do it? Let's get to action steps. Let's get to the metrics to measure our progress. Let's give feedback. Let's get it done. And ultimately, by the way, I think there's an idea for someone to be in that group that I call arbiter. And that is, okay, folks, let's do a progress review here. How are we doing? You know, and this is the thorough, timely completion. So those were Belbin's roles. Okay, you got those. And I'm going to leave you this. And by the way, get this deck because this will help you. Because what you can do is you can go down this one yourself. And you say, okay, well, wait a minute. Let's see. Somebody who's a role conductor has got to be mature. And you say, okay, that's me. Confident. Oh, I'm definitely confident. Clarifies goals, brings other people together to promote team discussions. Ooh. Well, I did tell them what time the meeting was. Ask yourself if they want to come talk to you, though, right? Keep that thought in mind. And then on the other side, you might get an idea of whether you're really good at this. If you're seen as manipulative, right? Or you're seen as somebody that just offloads work of the team to other people, you might not be the best conductor. I'm not going to go through all these because we don't have the time, but you need them all. You need them all. And this is a good self-assessment guide. You can look at both the positive and what I would call, say, the downside of each behavior and ask yourself, not only where can I contribute, where can others contribute? Here's the idea where you're going for. You're going to need them all of them at different stages, which I'll get into in a second. But the idea is that intentionally you apply these things as you go forward, okay? Now stick with me. So here's one, by the way, when you see here, Klepper Chapter 8, that's from a book, which I'll make another reference to later on, that I'm in the second edition of now, just finished the last chapter on. It's called The CEO's Boss, and I help boards and executive leaders around the world talk about how they can run their teams more effectively, particularly within the boardroom. And of course, I always talk about this idea, and this is the Belbin, the idea of, forming. You got to start out. When you do that, you need a conductor, consensus builder, and resource seeker. There's eventually that point where the productivity stalls out. That's usually when you're trying to generate ideas and people are checking them out to see if they work. You're not going anywhere. You're just trying to generate some traction. Eventually you get to the point where you decide on what you want to implement. That's when you accelerate. And I, of course, say cruise is when you can really take your plan and, I guess you might say, advocate it in the organization as a whole and monitor it in terms of its thorough implementation. So I use stalls, start, stall, accelerate, cruise. Think about it as forming, storming, norming, performing. All right, there it is. See, right in front of you. You might say, boy, Bill, that would have been fine. Why didn't you start there? A picture would have been 1,000 words. Something very important here I want to point out to you. See that S-curve? That's Tuckman's. That's Tuckman's original S-curve. That applies in just about everything we do in terms of our work with teams. If you got a new team, forming, people-oriented roles. Storming, thought-oriented. Norming, action-oriented. Performing, as well action-oriented, but a different kind. So that's where it all comes together. Again, Chapter 8, if you ever want to read my book, you can ask me more questions a little later. So why are we doing all this, right? Here's the thing you can do tomorrow. Do today if you're going to work with your team. Take that assessment, by the way, and for the most part, get each other's discussion of those areas, those roles. Ask them, what do you think is your strength? What do you think is an area you, let's say, have a weakness? And let's see if we've got everybody here in the room that's willing to assume a particular role. And then let's ask ourselves where we're at, where we could go. The thing that you want to do as a team leader, and let's call you a conductor now, right, in Belbin's language, is you want to kind of monitor to make sure you got this whole thing working, okay? And also keep in mind that you might not be the best conductor at all times. If you're the charter leader of the group, you pull them together, you tell them what their mandate is, the agenda for action, that's good. But you might want to hand over to somebody else that has more people-oriented skills to facilitate your meeting. And then you can get more involved in the implementation or even the discussion as you get into the storming. I hope that makes sense. We'll come back to it if you want. So here's the thing I want to tell you. The team collaboration is really meant to be a win-win. All of these, this is from the Thomas Kilmann conflict model you might know about, are less than a win-win position, are less than a win position. You're going to find people on your team that are very, very concentrated on themselves in terms of their agenda, that they want to win, right? What it is they want to do. And for the most part, they're not considering other people. They're very competitive people. You got to find a way to get a check on that. You might find others that just the opposite. They're very high on the process of the team, but they'll concede very quickly. That's as you can see on the other end of the continuum. There are some people that just what I call free riders, right? They avoid. There might be people, though, by the way, they say, oh, look, compromise is key. By the way, another name for compromise is many lose, many lose. So what are we going for? Well, we're going for collaboration. And the way we're going to get there is through consensus decision-making. So that's what I want to take you into next, is talk about how you can collaborate on your team. That is the winning way. What's consensus? It's a process where group members develop, agree, and support, right, the decision. This is how you get commitment from your team for implementation of what it is you agree to. How do you do it? Well, you have to take time. It's a process of deliberation. You finalize your decision collectively. And more importantly, and this is why consensus is very key, it has social and political effects. What are the social effects? The social effects, people like to be involved in the things that they're going to be affected by. So there's the social impact. What's the political? I have a voice. I've been given a voice. And so these two things work very effectively in terms of getting the best decision-making out of teams. Now, you want to go off and make a decision by yourself? You want to come down people and tell people what they're doing? All right? You don't have to do this. But if you really want to use the strength of your team to come up with the best decisions, right, to implement those decisions well with high commitment, consensus is the direction to go. It's collaboration, folks. It's collaboration. So here's the thing you can do at home, too. And what I like is, first of all, you got to be very clear on what your strategic challenge is. Don't ever call a team together and say, not sure what I'm thinking about here, but I have an idea. No. As a leader, if you're a charter leader of your team, don't waste their time. When you bring them together because you have a strategic challenge that you basically want to present to them, and you want to use the diverse talents of those people to help you come up with the solution, all right? So again, not only talk about what the task is, but talk about the roles. That's the process piece, right? Balance this in your team. And by the way, just so you know, research shows, we always like to do this in academia, right? Did you know the fact that most, I guess you might say, comprehensive look at teams showed that the groups actually do outperform a proficient team member by 97 times if you manage it well. If you don't manage it well, you're going to probably say, I probably could have done better myself. But anyway, research shows that if you go through the consensus process, if you use the team and manage it well, you're going to get better results. So I'm calling on you as a leader now. What am I saying? You got to be more egalitarian and participatory, right? If you thought you could run your teams and get the highest amount of performance out of them by being, how can I say, command and control? Nah. What you want to do is yield to this idea that members' consensus decision-making is not only afforded, but what you feel is their equal input is what's going to make for the best output, all right? You have to believe that. And again, through consensus decision-making, the more participation, the better. You got to be willing to accept that. So if you're on the clock and you say, I don't have time for all this discussion, I know you got some great ideas, but we don't have time for it. We got to move on. I'm making the decision. Look, don't frustrate yourself. Just tell people you're going to make decisions and you'll live by your consequences of those decisions. But I don't think you want to do that. You wouldn't be on this webinar if you did. What is consensus decision making? Well, here it is. Be clear on what your problem is. Don't go in there half-baked, all right? What is your personal challenge? What's the case you're trying to present to them? Give them a present state. Here's what we're doing now. And oh, by the way, here's what we've got to go to. Be very clear, very clear. The difference between here and there is a gap. And then now what you want to do is you say, okay, what's causing the gap? Why can't we get from here to there? And I typically say, you should be looking at all levers of your business system. Is it the structure? Is it the process? Is it us, the people? Is it our culture? Which, by the way, we get a long discussion on. Make it short and sweet. Is it the way we're doing things around here? That's what culture is. Then what you do is you start the debate. You generate as much solutions for closing those gaps as you can. And by the way, it can't go on forever. I'm realistic about that. So at some point in time, you just do a test and you say, okay, folks, we've got a number of alternatives here of ways to close this gap. Does anybody strongly object to any of the alternatives of choice that have been offered? And if there's silence in the room, you say, good. Now let's take a straw vote on what you prefer to do. What would be the preference? The majority, and let's then go forward because we can't sit here in what I call the analysis loop too long. So in the end result, you put it into an action plan, and I'll tell you how to action plan, right? Milestones, responsibilities, timing, metrics. What are your barriers? What are the resources you need? Put all that down on paper. And then, by the way, get to work. Get to work. That's the implementing part of your team when you get to that. And then as a change advocate, right, an arbiter, you, as the leader of the team, will find great value going forward. All right, I've gone a little quick here. Here's what I hope I gave you in this period of time. Use team roles. Use them more intentionally. Assess them at the front end. See where they become apparent in terms of their implementation. Are you at the forming stage? Norming, right? Where are you? And use people because of their strengths, right? Team up in that way. Collaboration is the key, a win-win decision making. Don't settle, right, for anything like a compromise or straight competing or checking out or avoiding. And so team decision making can, what we know, outperform individual decision making, but you got to work hard to get there and do the right things in the process to achieve it. And last by no means least, I'm calling you to be more of an egalitarian participatory leader. Some of you may say, but I'm getting paid to be in command and control of this group. And I'll say, yeah, but you're not going to get the best out of them unless you can shift a little bit. Okay, folks, I hope I've kept your attention. Let's go to questions and answers. And Gershom, come back in here and help me with this.
All right, Bill. We've got a number of great questions coming in, but let's start with this. We had a person who described that they've had a pretty successful time forming this kind of collaborative environment horizontally in their organization, and then downstream, with the people that they manage and their horizontals manage.
That's good.
But when they're reporting up into particularly an international or a matrix sort of reporting structure, they're having a more difficult time getting that kind of collaborative environment in place. So maybe you could speak to how you would foster that kind of relationship and working structure from the middle of an organization.
Sure. By the way, a lot of times what we talk about this is leading up. In most cases, if we're leading horizontally, that means you've got a good, what I would call a peer network relationship, and you can find a way to kind of manage the boundaries. And you all are kind of knowing you're working to try to achieve the overall strategy of the company. So look, let's not fight each other. Let's collaborate. Sound familiar? Going down, of course, you have the authority of your office, your position, your leadership that you can leverage. So yeah, I can see where these things could be working for you. Then, of course, now you got this big issue. I've got to try and sell this sucker, right? I got to make this work. And so, by the way, if you come into the course, I'd love to have you. We got the last day I spent just on how do you manage the power matrix within your organization. So for the person that asked this question, which is a very good question, and by the way, it's the one that I love to have asked because it's the way you, I guess, close it. And this thought is now you've got to interface. You as the leader of your team have to interface with those people in authority and try and sell your best plan, right? So I'll give you a little bit on it. Won't dwell on it though. I want you to think in terms of this way. There's going to be people above you. This is the leading up part. This is the power matrix design that are going to be supportive. They're going to be supportive of what it is you have to offer, right? They're going to be, in many ways, what I would say, a source of influence of others of power, all right? So first identify those people, who buys into your plan, who has power, right? And buys into the plan you're offering. Now, let's be realistic though. What you're telling me here is you got some other people up there that are not supportive of your plan, right? And have power more than you. But just remember what I said you do first. First, you identify those people with power that do support you. Now what you got to do is go to that person of power and say, look, go over there and talk to Bill because he seems a little reluctant to the fact that I'm recommending in my plan something that I understand is going to affect his side of the business or his operation. But I know that where you guys are more on a, listen closely here, on a lateral level, right? Talk about these things because you all have responsibility for the overall strategy of the company. I think it'll drive it. to greater performance if we do this. So do me a favor, interface with that person, see if you can't, if nothing else, just let them be open to what it is we're presenting. Try to keep them neutral. So understanding the power matrix is very key in leading up. This idea that you can turn them into a kumbaya moment with you, particularly when you don't have power, is wishful thinking. But boy, if you got people with power on your side, those people can interface with those that are your distractors, or, people not open to your, I guess you might say, plan for change, and can be helpful in terms of, I guess you might say, getting greater support. So that's my thoughts on that. Excellent question. We can deal more with that if you want. Go ahead.
That kind of takes the flip of that, let's say.
Sure.
People asking about, a number of people are asking about how you might handle either long-standing teams or permanent standing teams, particularly ones that are set in their ways, that might be resistant to some kind of change or some of these collaborative approaches.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question too. I mean, now everybody's in the last day of my program, so I wish I could let you come into it. But these are two good questions. How do I maneuver within the power matrix to get my plan once my team generates is accepted, right? And the other one is, wait a minute, I've got a team. To be very honest with you, is a little bit, how can I say, reluctant to take on change initiatives. I mean, they're either set in their ways, or they're tired or whatever. So what I like to do is say, look, we're all human. We're all human. And I can see where people can get tired. I can see where people can get set in their ways. So let me give you a little insight. And I give you a quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "I'm all for progress. It's change I object to." So that's at the heart of what we're talking about, is change. And remember, I told you, this is about change leadership on your part as a leader. So I'm going to give you a real quick formula that'll help you here. And then I wish I could ask a quiz here, but I can't. But think about this formula. D times V times P greater than C. Okay. Now, I usually spend a lot of time playing with people with this, but here's the answer. D is dissatisfaction with the current state, times V, a vision of the future state, times P, process, the way to get to the future state. And all those, by the way, have to overcome the natural resistance to change. I'm all for progress. It's change I object to. Now you say, okay, Bill, thanks for the formula. What the hell do I do with it? Well, here's the short of it. If I've got a team, right, that's just kind of tired, be honest with you, I'm not so sure a strong vision or even a better process is going to get them off the dime. What you got to do is tell them why, look, if we stay kind of lethargic at this point in time, we're going to just die a natural death. Yeah, now, but I'm not telling you to be dishonest, but show them the point where competition is just overtaking you in the marketplace. Talk about how the customers are saying, you know what, your product, your service, it sucks, right? Show them the data. In other words, the way you get people out of lethargy is basically, in many ways, being a D leader of the DVP, right? In other ways, by the way, if you think that they are dissatisfied and want to change, but, how do they get the motivation? Give them a vision. Go ahead. Go on, give them a strong vision. Don't make it up. Be clear. If we can, by the way, folks, talking to your team now, if we can solve this one, let me tell you where this is going to take us. Let me tell you what this presents to us as our future, etc. That's the vision. And oh, by the way, if they even got the vision and they are dissatisfied, give them the step-by-step way to get there, right? Give them the step-by-step, because it's very difficult to achieve a vision in one quantum leap. What you got to do is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Ultimately, by the way, you're trying to overcome, as Mark Twain said, the natural resistance to change. So there's my thoughts on that. We spent a lot more time on that day 3, but that's an excellent question.
All right. So another thing about sort of a challenge that people seem to be facing, I've got a few questions about teams that have built-in competitiveness within the team,
Yeah.
or a bully personality. So some of it's people
Yeah.
asking both formally there's competition, and then informally there's
Yeah,
competition.
yeah. That, this is, now we're into what I call the behavioral dynamics. It's chapter 8, by the way. Behavioral dynamics of teams. You just can't pretend it's not there. And what I like to tell people is, look, it's personal. They say, what? I say, yeah, it really is. Because what's at play here is each individual's need and the way they see the world. And particularly if we're dealing in change, the first question that everybody asks, they won't articulate publicly because it's not politically correct to do so, is what's in it for me, right? How is it going to affect my life, right? So I think leaders have to focus in on a couple things. One is being aware of the fact that you always got to be able to answer that question for each member of your team. What is in it for you, right? Now, having a collective discussion of that thing can be very, very, I think, cathartic. Don't make it a side conversation, because then it'll look like you're playing favorites. Talk about, say, look, this has got to be disorienting to you. All change is, even if it's positive. Let's talk about how this will affect you. Let's each go around the room. Come on, let's be honest with one another. What do you think, and what are your concerns? Let's see if we can't address them, right? That's number one. Number two is understand that, and this is where I get into the social styles, behavioral part, is that you're going to have different kinds of reaction to different things. If you've got a strong driving personality, all right, command and control, by the way, in terms of other words, these are people who are going to want to, hey, let's solve this thing today. Here, no, I don't want any more discussion. Come on, this is what we got to do. I feel strongly about it. Okay, all right. And then the answer is, yeah, that'd be fine if you're the only one being affected by it, but you're not, right? So you got to find a way to balance the driving, those creative people that are always generating too many ideas that you can't focus on enough, the amiable folks that are just more process oriented and don't want to initiate anything, to the analytic that just you're overloading their circuits because you're not giving them the time to think it through. But if you could address each one of those openly in the group and have discussions, so everybody knew, well, Bill, obviously, you're kind of a driving, expressive person. We can see where you get impatient when we get process oriented, but yet it's important for us to be on board and committed. So it's that kind of discussion, along with how it affects me, about our individual styles within the team and how they're going to complement rather than conflict if we, again, adjust appropriately and you facilitate us as your leader, can be very helpful.
All right, I think we have time for one more. And I kind of want to build on that. A few people have been asking specifically about getting outside of the brainstorming loop, making the jump from sort of what you're just talking about, making sure everybody's on board, everybody's that collaboration piece, to sometimes decision just has to be made. And how you do that without sort of creating whiplash for people who've been in this collaborative environment sometimes up until that point.
Well, I'll tell you what, and here's the way I kind of premise this with teams when I work with them. Say, look, our most limited resource is time. Nobody's been able to figure out yet how to put more than 24 hours in a day. They just haven't done it, right? And so what I like to do is try and set expectations beforehand in terms of what our timeline is. Folks, I wish we had 3 years to deal with this, but guess what? We got 3 weeks, or we got 3 months, right? And so the fact of the matter is that I think keeping conscious of timelines is very helpful to bring closure. And remember, I gave you that process early on of where you talked about when you're going through consensus, when you've generated what you consider to be a viable number of alternatives, stop that process. Stop it and say, okay, folks, let's just pause here now. Is anybody strongly object to what we got there? And if this is, then you say, let's take a straw vote and see what our preferences is to what we move on. I'd like to continue the brainstorming process forever, but guess what? We got time constraints. And by the way, in most cases, time is money. So I think people were accepting of that. But sure, if you let them go on forever and ever, right, in terms of generating ideas and alternatives of choice, good. But as a leader, at some point in time, again, using time constraints is the issue. Nobody can argue against it. Is bring it down to the point of we got to make a choice. It's time to put a stake in the ground, folks. So this collaboration has been very helpful. We've gotten to the point of what I think are consensus on alternatives of choice. Now let me get a straw vote, see which ones we prefer, and then we can even narrow down further what we're going to move forward. Most people will accept it if you go through that kind of intentional effort at achieving closure.
Well, thank you so much. Speaking of time constraints, we're going to have to let everybody get back to their day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll have a recording available for you shortly. And Bill, thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Gershom. Thank you, folks.